All right, my name's Mike Kamate. I live in Brooklyn, New York. And one time in 5th grade, I had my lightsaber confiscated when I brought it to school.
I'm Jake Tinder. I live in Ohio. And one time my mom sold my lightsaber in a garage sale while I was away at camp.
That's an awful, awful thing.
Oh, literally the worst. I refused to let her live it down. I brought it up at Christmas, actually.
Has she taken the hint and gotten you a new one yet?
No, but she did look. She said for Christmas she was looking on eBay trying to find me the same one. And to be fair, I don't even know what the same one was. I've done a lot of searching myself, and I can't find it. It was probably a knockoff, but to me, it was an original.
Was it one of the folding ones that you like shot out?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It was like one of the first hard plastic shootout ones, and it basically just like connected to the little flashlight at the end that was designed to look like, an indescribable like lightsaber, just whoever's.
Mine was a knockoff one, definitely found at like a party store, and it had 3-4 buttons on the handle, and you press them all, and it said, it made sounds like whooshing sounds, but not the copyrighted Star Wars sounds.
It was probably marketed like Star Blade or
yeah,
something.
something like that. It was green, and it went with my Luke Skywalker costume.
Nice. Well, this is a podcast. The idea, I guess, is that we talk about Star Wars.
We got a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about, but today we're going to start with our background in Star Wars. Coming up with Star Wars, where we found it, how it found us, where and if we lost it, and how we found it again. Star Wars has been a big part of my life and yours as well. So this episode will serve as sort of a introduction point to us and our background in the greatest sci-fi franchise of all time.
Definitely gives the listeners a chance to really judge us, I think, and kind of see how we measure up to their level of Star Wars fandom. But I assure you, we are just as devoted as you guys.
All right. So the idea for this first one kind of came from our first recording session, where we recorded for probably about 3 hours, originally just talking about The Force Awakens, which came out. But it kind of ended up just being this overall random discussion about Star Wars. And we thought that it would probably be best to kind of wheel it back a little bit and focus a little bit more on individual aspects of Star Wars. So the episodes will be a little shorter, a little easier to follow. And this is a good a place as any to start. So the idea for this really comes from another podcast called My Star Wars Story. We'll have links to that in the show notes. But basically that podcast is every episode, which comes out, I think, on a monthly basis. Every episode is about another person somewhere in the universe connected to Star Wars fandom or the series itself somehow, and just kind of going through their backstory, where they came into Star Wars, the kinds of toys they collected, or where they saw the film for the first time, and that's where I want to start today. So, Mike, please tell me, where did you first see Star Wars?
I think it's a question that is really going to be hard to answer for a lot of people. I mean, there's some people who can probably think about it and just think they know where they saw Star Wars for the first time, which is I was one of those people. I thought I knew, and then I really had to think about it harder. And it turns out the first time I saw Star Wars, I have the exact date that I saw it on.
Oh wow!
The first time I saw Star Wars was July 17th, 1993. It was a Sci-Fi Channel marathon. It was the first time that the entire trilogy was broadcast on TV, and there was just a lot of hype going into this. It was advertised pretty regularly. It was one of the big things that TV Guide was touting at the time, like being like, "Oh, the Star Wars trilogy broadcast for the first time." We've kind of become jaded to, because Spike TV does the marathon every year or whatever, and various prequel marathons and whatever. But this was the first time, and to kind of make it a special event, they brought Carrie Fisher in to host the whole thing. And I distinctly remember Carrie Fisher, just these little interstitials between commercial breaks, just saying, "Oh, well, this is something that happened during the filming, and here it is," definitely reading off a cue card or something like that, but also injecting some of that crazy Carrie Fisher that we all love to kind of like watch on TV now. But it was just the beginning of it, you know.
Also, I offered to let one member of the crew each day rip the tape from my breasts. It was something on the call sheet.
I didn't really grasp what it was at the time. I just knew it was something interesting. There was stuff that I had never seen before. Just a world. And what stuck out to me was probably the spaceships.
Which one was it that you saw? Did you actually get to start from Star Wars, or did you hop in at some point during like Empire?
It was a 2-day event, and I know for sure that I caught A New Hope, because the reason I do know that is because I watched Obi-Wan die, and I was very perplexed at what happened there. As a kid, trying to understand why this man in a cloak had a lightsaber pass through him, and then, I mean, you can't even call it a lightsaber. As a kid, watching a man have a sword made of light pass through him, and then he just drops to the ground. I just didn't understand why he wasn't cut in half, or why he wasn't...
Where the body went.
Yeah, I thought there's a trap door. Like, my brain had not fully formed. I was maybe 6 years old. I think I was 5.5, 6. And so there was no way that my mind could fathom what was going on. This is science fiction. This is one of my first exposures to it, besides maybe cartoons, you know. But watching Obi-Wan die, and then also my brain not being able to grasp the idea of more than one character with a white beard. We have that character at the end of the film when they're planning the Death Star trench run, and he was one of the generals, I guess, or something like that. And he is explaining the plan, and I leaned over to whoever I was watching with, probably my brother or my dad, and I say, "Oh, that's Obi-Wan. He's in disguise. Nobody knows it's him, though." And yeah,
no.
Well, and also it wasn't that weird, because then you hear him say,
"Use the Force, Luke,"
when he's about to launch the torpedo. So it's like, oh, okay, validated, definitely validated.
You thought it was the guy with the white beard talking through the headset.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that's what was going on the whole time. Yeah, and I think, like, you know, from there I must have fallen off. Like, maybe I missed a little bit of Empire, because it was a 2-day event. So, you know, you tune in and out. You have to go eat dinner or something like that. But then I do remember Jedi as well, and being terrified of Jabba the Hutt. And from there, like, the only reason I was able to trace this memory back was by remembering this one quote. It was Leia saying, just Leia leaning on some Star Wars memorabilia or some set piece, saying something along the lines of something, half naked chained to a giant slug, you know, and that stuck in my head. From that point. Yeah, that phrase, from that point until when you asked me the question, when was the first time you saw Star Wars? When I was like, I need to figure out when this was. And so I went on YouTube and just typed in Carrie Fisher hosting Star Wars marathon. And that yielded no results.
Really? That didn't do it?
Yeah, it did. Well, it was in YouTube. Well, because if you type in Carrie Fisher hosting, what you come up with on YouTube is just tons of videos from Force Awakens of Carrie Fisher hosting a panel, or like making a TV appearance, all of like the popular YouTube videos that are getting hits, the trending things that YouTube would expect you're looking for right now.
Yeah.
Not a random 1993 sci-fi channel before they changed the spelling of sci-fi. Like, that's what we're talking about here, like the original Sci-Fi Channel. So that yielded no results. So I was like, okay, what can I do? And I just kept typing in Carrie Fisher hosting. I went to her IMDb page and looked for things where she appeared as herself, and I looked at archival footage, and I still wasn't able to find anything. It was just, this is too small an appearance to go on an IMDb page, or too obscure an appearance. It wasn't even a film. These were like little 2-second segments, like 30 seconds before and after commercial breaks. And so this is my Hail Mary pass. I just go to Google and I type in, does anyone remember that marathon of Star Wars where Carrie Fisher hosted it in the 1990s? And the first thing to pop up was this random ass Star Wars board, which I will link to in the notes of this as well. It just talks about all the Star Wars marathons from the 1990s, and everybody fondly remembers that weekend where they marathoned the original trilogy on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, and so from there I went back to YouTube and typed in Carrie Fisher 1993 Star Wars marathon,
and that was enough.
And that was it. And that got me my hits. And I pulled up the video, and sure enough, there's Carrie Fisher, just a half naked, chained to a giant slug, just fondly remembering that scene.
24-year-old. So when Han and Luke were led away, leaving me half-naked, chained to a giant slug, I had my own ideas about how Leia should react. I yelled after them, "Don't worry about me, guys, I'll be fine." I came up with that line. It seemed the right combination of fear and bravado, and I was happy to see that they kept it in.
God love the internet.
I know. It's like I set out with a goal and I achieved it. You know, I knew I was going to make it happen, and I found it.
And now you can make your own fan edit.
Yes.
You can go get the movie, you can cut in your Carrie Fisher bits, and you can watch it as you originally did.
That's where it started for me for real, because then I could take it back and I could see all the Star Wars references around me after that weekend. I would go back and I'd meet my best friend at the time, and I'd go to his house and I'd see a little plastic container, one that you mentioned earlier to me, Jacob, that had the Star Wars Vader case.
The Vader case.
He had one, and I was like, that's Darth Vader. And so I was like, yeah, Darth Vader. And then I found out like why he would wear a black cape and make really like asthmatic noises walking around the playground at after school or something like that. Like, I didn't understand it until I saw that marathon. And then it just became a thing that you do on vacation, on sleepovers, on just anywhere, you know, like I would go to a friend's house for the weekend and say, oh, why don't we watch Star Wars tonight? And we go to the video rental store and rent the VHS tape. And it was just, I don't know. And I do remember, like, I remember seeing Empire Strikes, because I don't think I saw Empire during that marathon. I think I missed out on Empire.
That's a shame.
I know. Well, I don't... That I wish I want to say that my 5.5-year-old brain really would have just been like, this is excellent screenwriting, and I feel like this is definitely the standout film from this trilogy that I'm watching right now. But I don't know if I would have been able to grasp that. But I remember a few years later seeing Empire Strikes Back for the first time, and not, again, being too young to understand like the way that movies are made and the way that stories are told. And then when you have Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon landing at Bespin, when Lando's coming out to greet them, they do that long shot, and they have Lando walking down the catwalk to them, and it's from behind, and you see, all I saw was a cape and a dark head at the, like, you know, his hair just from behind, but it looked like a helmet. I'm like, oh, like Han Solo says, oh, it's my friend, and I said, oh, Darth Vader's your friend? Plot twist. But that was the first time I saw Empire, and again, like, it just remembering all like the misunderstandings that I had with Star Wars.
Yeah. Quite a few.
If like one so more far. Thing from like, yeah, Return of the Jedi, like I remember seeing that like as a few years later from the marathon. And my brother, this is the scene where Vader throws the lightsaber at Luke. My brother just goes, wait a second, how did you just throw the lightsaber? And an older kid, he's probably like 2 or 3 years older than us, was at the party with us, and he just goes, "Oh, he took a piece of Scotch tape and just threw it at him." And like I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, just some tape. Darth Vader must have some tape on his body. That's what got the lightsaber that was still ignited thrown at Luke." Sure, makes sense. Yeah, it's like understanding a cultural reference. I feel like
that's why it's so fun to watch the movies with somebody new. You know, especially if they're like a kid.
Yeah. I have not had that experience yet of watching it with someone younger than myself. I've only tried to introduce girlfriends and ex-girlfriends to the films.
A very important time in a relationship.
Yeah, that's a story for a different time. I sense a great podcast in talking about significant others in Star Wars.
Oh my gosh, with special guests, our girlfriends.
Oh my god, I can't think of anything she'd want to do less. So now you know my story. What about yours?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure I was around 5 or 6. I have a really hard time remembering this just because I can remember watching it so many times as a kid. I watched it over and over again. It's all I wanted to watch after I saw it for the first time.
What year were you born? So we can set the...
I was born in the year that you first saw Star Wars, 1993. By the time I was crawling, you were watching Star Wars for the very first time. And 5 or 6 years later, I saw it for the first time. And I don't know exactly where I was. I was either at home or I was, at a family friend's house. But I do know that I was watching a copy of the 1995 VHS box set release. That's the one that has, Vader and Yoda and I believe a stormtrooper on the spines of the cassette boxes.
The front covers are just their faces, right? It's just
right.
like Does it say Star Wars on the front of the case?
Yeah, it says Star Wars on the front of the case. I have a copy of it now. I have a box set of it, but mine doesn't have like the top that's supposed to go on it, or like the thing that covers the entry point for each VHS. I think that had Vader on the outside of it. It said Star Wars on the outside. But the important thing about these were that these were the THX master releases on VHS. This was the first THX master release on VHS. I think it was put out on Laserdisc before that, but it was the first time for VHS, and it was the last time that the original trilogy would be put on VHS in their original form.
Right.
Because the following year was when the special editions came out. So
you got to experience it pre-special edition.
And I haven't watched it another way since. I may have seen maybe DVDs of the special edition with the original trilogy at some point, like a sleepover, of course, but by choice, I've never watched it any other way. In fact, for a long time, instead of getting DVD copies, or before I had internet access where I could download comparable copies for myself, I just watched those VHSs over and over, late into the 2000s. So in high school, I was still pulling out the VHS player and hooking it up to my flat screen and watching the VHS copies until I eventually came around to the Harmy edits, which is a topic for another day. But yeah, as far as I can recall, I watched the original box set in order. I think we may have borrowed it from those family friends that I mentioned, and that was the first time for me. But after that, I watched it over and over again. That's all I wanted to watch. We would borrow copies from the library. We were very frequent visitors there. I would also get VHSs for the Droids and Ewoks show, like the animated series VHS tapes, whenever they had those in. And then, I was just seeking out whatever I could. And people, when they found out that I enjoyed it, they'd show me things that they thought I would find interesting. For example, Thumb Wars, the Steve Odenkirk parody of Star Wars, was
Steve Odenkirk, the creator of the Kung Pao.
Enter the Fist. Yep.
Yeah. And
still one of the greatest movies of all time. Getting a sequel soon, actually. He said in July he's working on the sequel. Thank God.
Yeah, I mean, I think "thank God" is a very mixed response from many people. I don't know if everybody's saying that, but
I watched that movie on repeat as well, and that was long after I didn't find out about the origin of Thumb Wars until after I'd seen that movie. So it was completely disconnected from me. I just happened to fall into Steve Odenkirk's crazy little land of eyes and mouths on various objects on the human body. That's my first time story. I would watch it over and over again. I can't recall any, funny little, I don't know what to call your memories of these movies with the Obi-Wan's death and whatnot, but I didn't have anything like that, necessarily for myself. I just, I watched it over and over again, and I just dove right into that world. And since then I really haven't left it. I just really, really enjoyed it.
Do you remember a specific first viewing, like who you were with or anything like that?
I think I was just, they all meld together, but the earliest two that I can even think of would be, I'm going to assume that I was at our friend's house. We had some family friends. My dad had a friend that he's been, friends with since third grade himself. So they probably went and saw Star Wars together in theaters, which is really cool. And then, they sat us down in front of a TV and popped in those VHS tapes. And, that was my first time. I think those kids had already seen it, probably several times over, but that was a first for me. And from there, we would just borrow their VHSs when we could. But since those kids wanted to watch them too, we'd have to get them from the library, and that was that. That was the beginning. So you mentioned, after seeing it for the first time, watching it at sleepovers and stuff like that. What about after? After you've seen it, after you've become a fan, you start understanding Star Wars and the Star Wars related things in the world around you. What kept you involved?
I think what kept me involved was having a sibling to play with, and that was a really big deal for me. We had two ways of playing. One was live action, where we would be the characters ourselves, and then there was action figure playing, where we would have the figures and play with them. And that would be a decision we would make at the beginning of our play, whether we are going to be us or the action figures. And I think that type of play was what kept it going, because so often you could say, oh, well, let's play with our action figures now. and having that Star Wars injection, like weekly, bi-weekly, however often we did, it was a way to kind of make our own stories. And then finding that the universe extended beyond the films, that was what I think kept it going. The books, it was every avenue of my life I could consume something in Star Wars and have someone to share it with, whether it was my brother, my best friend, an uncle, something like that. It was just, there was nowhere you could turn and you wouldn't find someone who was interested in Star Wars.
Right. So you were how old when you initially saw it?
5.5.
5.5. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems about, the same as me. As a kid, how did you role play? Because we did the same thing.
If we had like a play rifle or something like that, which is very uncommon, there was always that one friend who was allowed to have toy guns, but most of us, I think, were not allowed to have toy guns as kids.
Yeah.
So that would be maybe that kind of prop, maybe a black cape. My best friend had a black cape that he wore for Vader. Yeah, it was a weird thing. And I think that it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever watched Power Rangers or like if you ever watched anything as a kid that has like stereotypical characters, like Star Wars, I guess, could be one of them. You have like the rogue Han, you have boy turned into a hero of Luke Skywalker, the villain Vader. You have everybody gravitates towards someone, and you'd think like everyone would gravitate towards the hero, but no, like some people want to be the rogue, some people want to be the villain, and you would just have that friend that wanted to be that specific character. So you just kind of fall into role. And it was weird, like playing...
Well, wait, who are you?
I was Luke. I was definitely a Luke Skywalker person.
Right.
Yeah, so like the status quo. I was the one that was like, oh, I'm going to be the hero.
You're the everyman. Right.
But that became more difficult when you incorporate like between my brother and I was going to be Luke, he was going to be Han. But when you have like 3 or 4 kids playing it at once, then you kind of have to move around. Like you either become like someone wants to be Boba Fett, and then you kind of put them in scenarios that don't even seem like they could possibly be in the context of the films. Like I don't know, they're more akin to like having a Star Wars holiday special, just Boba Fett and Luke Skywalker are on the Millennium Falcon without any Han Solo, and they're just chilling out, just going, and they're just like doing some space adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just making our own expanded universe, really.
See, that's so fun. I miss that. I can think back fondly in playing Star Wars in my backyard, and we would use we had a little treehouse sort of thing, and that would of course be like the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon or whatever close quarters area we needed it to be. Down below was the sand pit, and that always made for either a good sarlacc or trash compactor, and the rope swing was usually the tool that I would use to show that I was a good Jedi and that I could swing across ledges and stuff. And then of course we had the toys, but can't really do that so much these days.
If you think about it, we're kind of like we're improv artists. That's what we were when we were acting out Star Wars or something like that. We were coming up with our own stories or mimicking ones that had already been told to us. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember ever just enacting the plot of one of the films. That was because like why would you play if you knew the ending?
You could already. I mean, you can go see it. I think the point of role playing, whether it be with the toys or with your friends, was always to make up your own stories and like continue the story, because there was only so much of it then. And at that point, when we were younger, there was really no notion that there would be more. Maybe more so for me because the prequels only came a few years later. But even in that time when I was playing around with my friends, we had to make it up for ourselves. And whether that meant that they'd go to some other planet and they'd battle the Wookiees or something, and Chewbacca would be conflicted. There's all sorts of things that you can make up for yourself, and that's what made it fun. And I think that continues to be what makes Star Wars so fun for kids of every generation. It's just that Star Wars leaves those holes open. There's a gap between the movies. There's a gap in the movies themselves for things that other characters could be doing. There are smaller characters that are never explained. There are references in the movies to things that have happened off screen, and all of that just kind of feeds into what kids would use to create their own little worlds, and writers to create their own worlds as well when writing like the expanded universe. Did you, being a little older than I was, and kind of being out there reading in the world where the expanded universe was kind of taking shape, were you reading any of that?
Yeah, The Courtship of Princess Leia was the first Star Wars book I ever read. That's by Dave Wolverton. Came out in 94, I guess. Wow. So I got to that pretty late in the game. I must not have read that until like 98, 97, 98. But as soon as I heard that there was a definitive story on how Han and Leia got married, that was exactly where I wanted to start learning about the expanded universe. And at the time, I thought it was great. It was a really cool story. There was one scene in particular that involved boobs, and that was kind of interesting. It wasn't a good...
Princess Leia's boobs?
No. Well, maybe there was reference, but the scene I'm thinking of specifically was like old lady shriveled up boobs. Which, reading that as like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, it's like, oh, boobs. But like this is a weird context for boobs that I really am not into that much. But that was, and looking back on it, I thought it was a really great story. You know, it involved a lot of Luke kind of like doing his thing, his Jedi thing, and seeing what happened after that film. But I guess people didn't like that book, looking back on the gender politics of it. Han is trying to woo Princess Leia, and like how better to win a woman's love than by winning a planet in a gambling match and then kidnapping her and taking her to that said planet so that she cannot be courted by anyone else.
He won the whole planet?
Yeah, it seemed like I don't really know, but like I remember someone had like a holocron or something like that, and just kind of like, it's like, this is a planet that I have and you can win it, and Han's like, sure, I'll win it. And then it turns out that the planet is just inhabited by rancors and indigenous people.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, they're like witches that are strong in the Force or something, and like Luke goes and teams up with one of them, and it's a great adventure. But yeah, that was my entry point into the Star Wars expanded universe, and it kept me going. And my biggest fascination with Star Wars in any respect was the starfighters and spacecraft. And for that reason, when I heard that there was a novel just called X-Wing, I thought that was it for me, and that I invested all my energy into learning about Star Wars into that series. I think Michael Stackpole did it, and then he may have turned the reins over to somebody else later on. But yeah, it was just like it was about Wedge and what Wedge did after blowing up the Death Star, and how he, like, Rogue Squadron, which is Luke's group of fighter pilots, Luke and Wedge's group, they reformed, and they just had a lot of adventures with the remnants of the Empire.
So that's the great thing about the expanded universe. You know, characters like Wedge, who were really minor characters in the movie, at least for me, like I never really thought of Wedge Antilles as anybody of great importance. Like, sure, he played his role in a lot of the pivotal scenes in the original trilogy, but as far as was concerned, he wasn't even a minor character. You know, for me, the minor characters were like Chewie and the droids. And you know, the villains and what have you.
Yeah.
But with the expanded universe, you could just take it anywhere, and you could give those people new life and stuff like that. That's what's so great about the EU, and the new canon novels. Wedge has come back in the canon novels too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In we're talking canon novels like post Episode 6.
Right. Yeah. The officially canon novels after Disney, bought it and did the whole canon refresh. Yeah, Wedge Antilles remains and plays a vital role in at least in the Aftermath trilogy. He's in the first book.
Wow. Okay. Looking forward to reading those for sure.
Yeah, it's a good read. Just finished it the other day. But that's awesome. I haven't read a whole lot of EU for myself. I own a couple of them, and I started them, but by the time I actually got into it, they started ramping up for the new canon novels, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna cut my losses and maybe revisit these someday, just as a curiosity. But I want to know as much as possible about the, I guess, official story. So I haven't read any of those. The X-Wing is on my short list, of course, with like the Heir of Thrawn or the Thrawn trilogy. I think is like the go-to.
Right.
That, and I think I have like some trilogy of like bounty hunter books or something like that looked interesting in an antique shop. But
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of like iconic Star Wars books. I think like the what was it, Crystal Star or something like that. That I might have I'm making that up too, but I remember seeing that.
Dark Crystal. You think of Dark Crystal?
No. I think it was the Crystal Star. There was one of I forget when Luke got married. Luke gets married at some point.
Spoilers.
Well,
no, that's Mara Jade, right? That's something that I've heard about, because that kind of bled out of the expanded universe and into some of the other sort of Star Wars media later on, like video games, for example. Those sorts of names pop up, and you kind of take note of those as you go through. What about video games for you? Did you get into video games as a kid? Did you play any Star Wars video games? What was that like for you?
I was not really allowed to play video games as a kid. Here's the thing. I was not allowed to have a system in the house. The most I had was a Game Boy on it. Game Boy, so there wasn't much that you could do in terms of Star Wars for Game Boys. But all my friends had video game systems, and I was unsupervised at those houses, or it was the norm to play video games in those houses. So I could go to my friend's house and be on his computer with him for more than like an hour or two at a time. That was where I got my introduction to TIE Fighter, and it's interesting that I started. You kind of like see the age of a person if they started with X-Wing or TIE Fighter, or X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. For those who don't know what that game is, if you are a Star Wars fan and you are a fan of the spacecraft in that game, any flight simulator from Star Wars is going to be great. But TIE Fighter is probably one of the most legendary over X-Wing. It was just,
why is that? Why is it better?
X-Wing was, the interface was kind of not clunky, but very like non-advanced. Like your HUD was really just a static image of the craft you were targeting, whereas in TIE Fighter it became a camera basically on the craft you were targeting, and its orientation based on your position.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's why playing X-Wing is extremely frustrating. Not only because the Death Star trench run is just like a 30-minute mission, just going down a Death Star trench, dodging TIE fighters and turrets, and it was one of the most excruciating missions I ever had to deal with. People still look at it very fondly, but TIE Fighter is really where it was at, because you got to play as the bad guy, and I think that's always a great part of RPGs when you get to choose like your actual alignment of a character. And that's where the video game really struck us. And I was like, oh, can I borrow this? So I brought home TIE Fighter, installed it on my home computer, and kind of snuck in games whenever I could. But that Rebel Assault, which is like a mouse-based adventure.
So good.
Yeah. Did you play the original Rebel Assault? I know you played Rebel Assault 2.
No, as far as I can remember, I didn't have Rebel Assault 1. I may have played it at a friend's or something, but in looking up like the titles of these games, I found the screenshots for Rebel 2 or Rebel Assault 2 were the ones that really jogged my memory. So I'm assuming that's the one that I played.
That was live action cutscenes.
Right. Yeah. It was basically like you're kind of there, and you can kind of like peep out from either side of some sort of obstacle you're hiding behind, and little basically like kind of cut out videos of stormtroopers are sort of doing the same thing, and you shoot them when they pop out, and that's how the game progresses, I'm assuming. Like, wasn't it just like a series of missions, and eventually you get to fly the Millennium Falcon through some sort of large craft, and then or cave or something, and I just recall the control as being just awful. Like the slightest touch, and you were bouncing off walls and
if you were using a mouse, for sure. It was. I had a joystick installed, so it made it a little bit easier to play those games. But the premise behind Rebel Assault 2 is, I think you are a rebel pilot, and the Empire is developing this new prototype TIE that can be invisible, and it's taking out your buddies and things like that. And I think the last mission you're remembering is flying through the TIE Fighter factory at the end of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think you're flying a prototype TIE or something out of the factory or something like that.
That could be. I do recall in that game, in the settings screen, to test your audio, when you would click the test audio track, they would play the Yub Nub theme from Jedi, like the Ewoks. I recalled having dance parties in my basement where we kept our our play computer, and we would just keep playing that and just dance to the Ewok tune. It's probably my favorite part of the game.
I think everybody remembers Shadows of the Empire as being a really iconic game for the N64 and in video gaming in general. It was just like the first kind of like out there, like nobody really knew a lot about Shadows of the Empire, but some gaming company was like, oh, we're going to take this novel and we're going to make something ridiculous at it. We're going to make a game. We're going to take a character that you don't know, that most people don't know from the Star Wars universe, and you're going to play as him. It was basically introducing the expanded universe on a mass scale, and I think a lot of people played that game.
Yeah, I certainly remember that game. The same family friends that introduced me to the Star Wars universe in the first place, they are the only people that I knew that had an N64. And when they weren't playing various WWE games or Star Fox, I was sneaking plays of Shadows of the Empire. Like that was what I was always trying to get into that system, regardless of whether or not they actually wanted to play. I just remember it being like dark, and it was just cool because you got to kind of assume the role of somebody completely new, and that just it put you further, immersed you further into that sort of world where Star Wars is massive and isn't entirely contained in the 3 movies that you've seen a million times.
Right. Some of the bosses in that game were ridiculous. Do you remember trying to fight the AT-ST without a jetpack?
Yeah.
You have to do it twice in the game. One time you have a jetpack, the first time you don't, though. And I think we followed the AT because you go on its heels, but you blast away at it. It takes forever if you're blasting on its heels. But we didn't realize that you could use the C-pad to look up and blast the head. So we would, I think, for like an hour, we would whittle away at this thing, the life percentage.
And it takes forever. That would take a really long time.
Oh, yeah. Horrible move on our part. Yeah. Not using that C-pad.
And, man, I was just thinking about that Rebel Assault 2. I remember getting that myself. I think my parents might have found it at, like, Goodwill or something.
Yeah.
And they brought home the disc, but it wasn't just Rebel Assault 2. Like, I didn't have the box and the artwork. It was just in, like, a clear case. And I believe it was on the same disc as a couple of other LucasArts games. So I think this was a sampler, and I included a link in the show notes that I found where somebody else also had this and can kind of verify, but I can't find a copy of that disc for myself. I've been looking everywhere because not only did it have Rebel Assault 2, but it also had The Dig. Did you ever play The Dig?
Mm-mm.
The Dig was this awesome sci-fi adventure game. I think the idea was originally Steven Spielberg's, and he was going to, I think he was going to write a book initially, and then he wanted to produce this as a movie, but instead it got picked up and was made into a video game. And the copy in the video game, I believe, was written by Alan Dean Foster, who was actually the guy who wrote the novelizations for Star Wars and like the Alien trilogy.
Wow.
And he later wrote a novel based on this game, and I haven't read that, but that game was cool. It was just one of those kind of adventure games where you crash land on like Mars or something, and you have to walk around and you have to find certain objects which help you solve certain puzzles, and that sort of thing. It kind of reminds me of the new game Space Age that you can play on iOS. I'm not even sure you could walk around. I think you basically just kind of like clicked arrows from room to room, but that game was really fun, and that somehow like still remains in kind of like my Star Wars headcanon, like because I just imagined it as Star Wars because it took place in space. It had the LucasArts logo in front of it, and to me it's all the same. But yeah, Star Wars in video games is always it took things into the video space again. So we kind of started watching the movies first, and that's our way of like watching something unfold on screen, which is a great way to like get it into our heads and burn it into our brains, which we then take to the outside world, and we're playing outside and we're playing with our figures and making up our own stories. And then we're taken back into this kind of video realm where you're doing the same thing that you were doing outside, but you're doing it again on the screen. And I think that Star Wars has always lent itself really well to video games, and it continued to do so with like the Battlefront games. Battlefront 1 and 2 for the PS2 probably still remain some of my favorite video games of all time. And as much as I love the new Battlefront game for PlayStation 4, I really miss some of the sort of storylines and actions that you could do in Battlefront 2, where you could, command basically whatever hero you wanted, and you could just run around and you could either kill droids or stormtroopers or other heroes. And I always loved that. Video games are great, but I think mostly I've bought systems specifically to play Star Wars video games.
Yeah, I think if you look at what's like the developments in Star Wars video games, besides Battlefront, I think less than a year ago, they just released on Good Old Games TIE Fighter X-Wing and X-Wing Alliance. And for anyone who hasn't played X-Wing Alliance, who has played like TIE Fighter and X-Wing, but if you haven't played X-Wing Alliance, that trumps TIE Fighter in a big way, because it adds the role-playing element to it. Not really where you get to choose alignment or anything, but your pilot is less of a faceless pilot, and you're now, like the son of a smuggler whose family has been displaced, and they kind of portray that in a really human way. You have really great voice acting, brother and sister who kind of pop in and out on missions. And more than that, like your missions are bigger. In TIE Fighter, you get dropped into a map, and then you return either to your Star Destroyer, or you get to press the H key and you hyper away. In X-Wing Alliance, you depart from your Calamari cruiser or your home base or wherever you're launching from, and you have to travel to a hyperspace buoy in the area, and you can engage hyperspace, and you go to another map, and it just kind of added a more real element to it.
Oh wow!
It was a great game, and and so much so that I've been trying to play it again, and like trying to convince myself to partition my my Mac to get like a Windows side to it, and do that, or just even find an old clunker.
Yeah.
And I eventually just decided, I remembered how frustrated I was playing the games, because they're not easy.
Yeah.
But they are really fun when you get it right. And I decided that rather than investing a good portion of my life in something I've already experienced on a play level, I just went to YouTube, and that is actually one of the best resources, as demonstrated from my investigation into when I first saw Star Wars. You can just watch playthroughs of any game, really, or at least footage. And so I've been going mission by mission through X-Wing Alliance, kind of just watching somebody play it for me.
That's kind of cool.
And it's not as boring as you'd think.
Right.
As a real fan of the game, I think it makes it really, really enjoyable.
Especially when the person that you're watching was actually good at the game. So it's more or less like watching, almost like watching a movie. You're not getting it quite as frustrated because you're not dying all the time.
Yeah, it's like watching home movies where the person in the film is doing everything better than me. It's like the me that I'm watching just knew every move to make, has played this mission 1,000 times, and it feels like it's like, I imagine like it's binge watching a TV show or something like that, and that's how it feels, like jumping on YouTube and checking out these old games, watching playthroughs, kind of remembering the stories.
YouTube's kind of awesome for remembering Star Wars stuff, huh?
Yeah, it's certainly it's an archive of sorts, and one that has a really good search engine.
What's the great thing about Star Wars fans in general? It's just that they're so dedicated that they collect everything, and it could be video, it could be toys, but they're putting it all online so that other Star Wars fans who are trying to think back at these things that have been lost to time, they may not be lost to time anymore, because you can just go online, you can find it there. Somebody else has had roughly the same experience as you within certain areas. So when you're looking up the video of your Princess Leia talking about being chained to the space slug while half naked, or games like this, or even the Star Wars toys that I've lost to time, it's a great place to look that up. Like I was looking up that vintage lightsaber toy that my mom sold in a garage sale, and although I couldn't find that, I found a bunch of other things that I completely forgot that I owned. For example, there was this Star Wars Darth Vader Squawk Box voice changer toy. And it was just this handheld unit. It almost looked like a walkie-talkie without the antenna, and it had like 4 or 5 buttons. Like 3 of them had phrases from the movie, like "I have you now," or just his breathing, or "Don't underestimate the Force." That was another one. But you could also like hit record, and it could basically save one line of dialogue that you spoke into it, and then play it back in the voice of Darth Vader. Like, that was so cool, and I don't know if I still have that. I'm gonna have to look around in my dad's house to see if it's there. But things like that you think you'll never ever, you never think you'll remember that again until you happen to see it somewhere online, and somebody else is talking about this awesome thing they had, and seeing if somebody else remembered it, and sure enough, like you do, or somebody else does. We
started by talking about our entrances into Star Wars. And you also, before starting this, you threw out a really interesting premise or question about falling away from Star Wars at all. And I I feel like to ask that question, you have to have you have to have an example of it. Like, did you fall away from Star Wars at any point, or like, did you just stop caring?
I think a lot of people do. That seems to be a pretty common thread for a lot of people. And I recognize that I'm a lot younger than a lot of the people that I generally talk Star Wars with. A lot of the people that I talk to are either old enough to have seen it for themselves in the theaters, or old enough that they saw it, very, very early on TV or in VHS or something, at an age where they could more appreciate the prequels for what they were, which in the general consensus was bad. And being younger, I don't really think that I fell into that sort of prequel hate period where, you watched episode 1 and after that you were just kind of disconnected from it because it wasn't what it was. You kind of lost that nostalgia on these new movies. I think that was pretty common for a lot of people. Myself, I didn't really fall away. Other interests kind of took over. I got really into music and collecting music and TV and film in general. I was watching a lot more movies, not necessarily just in the sci-fi genre, but other things as well. But I never stopped loving the franchise. I watched it all the time. There were points in my young life where I was involved in stuff more like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon. The kind of other collectible fads that kind of come through and take over not only your time, but your money as well. So I wasn't spending my allowance money on Star Wars figures anymore. I was spending them on packs of playing cards that are now sitting somewhere untouched. But other things would bring me back into it. I'd go visit my cousin who had a massive Star Wars collection, and I would just be in awe. And, it just put me right back into that space where I was when I was younger, and I would just want to go through every single one of his toys and just look at them all and put together the Lego sets that he had for the Star Destroyers and all those sorts of things. And then I'd go home and I'd pull out my old toys. I'd pull out my Kenner figures and my Micro Machines, and it came in waves. I'd bring it back to my friends as well because they'd fall away from it because they started getting into sports and stuff like that. But then I'd bring back Star Wars, suggest that we watch it on a sleepover, and we'd bring over our Jar Jar Binks sleeping bags and just watch them again. And so I don't think that I kind of fell away as much. I wavered a little bit because as I grew over, I realized that maybe the prequels weren't great. As you get older, you kind of come around to the more intricate details of filmmaking, like line delivery and acting and plot. And the prequels weren't real great for a whole lot of that, but at the same time, I still enjoyed it. I still enjoy watching them to a certain degree. They're kind of fun to watch. And
did you know they were bad at the time?
When I first watched them?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. No, my dad, no, he wasn't a huge fan. He was the one that, showed me the movies and put together, before the first movie came out, we actually had a marathon night at our friends, and we just got together and we played with our toys on the floor while we watched the 3 Star Wars movies. And in the middle, we'd have some pizza or go get some ice cream or something and come back and watch the next one. And just to prepare for the new one, we were all really excited for it. And, the kids liked it and the adults didn't have anything to say. Either they weren't big enough fans that it really punctured a hole in their memory of the former movies, or punched them right in the nostalgia. But as far as I was aware growing up, they were just fine. I didn't come around to the idea that they were necessarily bad until a lot later. I thought they were
rewatching them, maybe?
Yeah, until rewatching them. I rewatched them much later when I kind of came around to the idea that perhaps they weren't in the spirit of the former films, which I like so much. And that didn't necessarily make it bad for me. But I definitely saw what other people saw in it and why they didn't enjoy it as much. And there are aspects to them that were far from perfect, and that kind of, they're going to have to stand the test of time as they are. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to kind of dismiss them as the franchise moves forward. But, for me, they're still very much a part of my Star Wars coming up and whatnot, because I was so young. And being older, I don't know if I would have felt the same way, but I'm comfortable in how I enjoy the prequels. And while they're not my favorite, I'll still watch them on occasion. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely times when I kind of fell away from Star Wars, but things brought me back, just reading books or especially Harmy's despecialized editions. Once I came around to finding all the things that George Lucas changed in the special editions, which I didn't necessarily see because, I was watching the VHS copies for over a decade. I found out about Harmy's despecialized editions and all the work that he put into restoring what is known as the original format for the movies without all of George Lucas's changes and additions and whatnot. And he sourced a lot of things to put together a really cool, high quality, high definition version of the film. And after I came across those, that was the only way I decided that I wanted to watch it. And it's the only way I still watch it until Disney puts out the unaltered versions. And that helped too, because you get back into that with the original nostalgic feeling. You're not watching things that feel different to you. Like when you went to a friend's house and they had the special editions and there were all of a sudden rocks in front of R2-D2 and a bunch of monsters walking around, on Tatooine that you didn't see before, like that takes you out of it, especially if you've been watching the movies for so long. So yeah, there were definitely things that kind of took me out of Star Wars in a way, but I always got pulled back in, and I wouldn't say that I was ever far for very long. But how about you? What was your experience as you got older?
I was like you in terms of the prequels, where you don't really realize it's bad. But I was a little bit older than you when I saw each of them. So I think as I got older, I was able to see through what was going on in front of me. And I mean, episode 1, I saw all 3 in theaters. Right around when they came out. First one, kind of just, it was a movie in the theaters, and then episode 1, that is, and then episode 2 was really where something was kind of occurring to me that something was wrong. And I mean, something was wrong in terms of just like, why don't I care about anything that's happening right now? And I think there's a lot of reasons why that happened to me at that point. I think watching anything, whether it's like The Passion of the Christ or like any prequel to anything, just knowing how it's going to turn out kind of takes away the fun of watching it, being like, oh, I know, like, oh, I have this little kid that I just met in episode 1, he's going to end up being Darth Vader, so something awful is going to happen. Just having basically just knowing that like something bad is about to happen, for 3 movies is kind of enough to make a movie-going experience bad for me. And then a lot of episode 1 went over a lot of kids' heads, like mine. Like I didn't understand the blockade and the trade embargo and all that stuff.
All the politics.
Yeah. But I didn't understand it. And I don't know. Like I guess I didn't understand why it was a force, like why the droids were landing. I just never questioned it. I never questioned why, like, I don't know. Really anything that Red Letter Media points out in their amazing critiques of the first 3, of the prequels rather. I think those are just a remarkable way to open your eyes and be like, wow, I did not realize that. Yeah. And it was like I definitely remember sitting in the theater with my best friend and my soon-to-be girlfriend. We were just sitting in the theater and watching in episode 2 Anakin and Padme kind of just riding around on those big creatures in the field, and just being like, kind of just saying like, what is going on right now? Like we felt like we were watching, just a B-grade romance flick. And yeah, we just didn't care about anything. And that episode 2 kind of just turned me off at that point. And that was still, I was able to enjoy the games. I think right around then is when I pick up X-Wing Alliance right after episode 2. So that definitely got me going for a while. But sooner or later, like I think 2 years later, whatever it was, episode 3 is just coming out in theaters, and I had not followed the production on it at all.
Yeah.
Whereas I was kind of keyed into the production of episode 1, even, my friends being like, oh, the trailer, or like, oh, like getting like a
lot of people talk about that trailer with fond memories. Even if they didn't like the prequels, they were really excited after seeing that trailer, and they thought, this is going to be great.
I didn't understand it was Star Wars when I first saw it. I thought it might have been a Star Trek film because I was seeing a bunch of craft that I was unfamiliar with. There were no Star Destroyers.
It was all really shiny.
Right. Yeah, it was mostly like the Trade Federation landing craft that really kind of like, I was like, am I watching a Star Trek trailer right now? I don't know. Like I didn't follow the episode 3 production at all. It just kind of happened, and it just showed up one day. I think I was graduating high school, and my mom was just like, hey, episode 3, you know, it's coming out. Let's go see it. And so I went and saw it with my mom, and it ended just how I thought it would. It was really hard. But like, I think the consensus is that it was the best of the 3, and that, and then it was just kind of over for me at that point. I was like, okay, it's done, you know, and I kind of retreated back into the things that I already knew about it. Like video games. I kind of, you know, went back and just started playing my flight sims again. But as my computer for college couldn't run older Windows games because it was a Mac, then, you know, you kind of lose that part of you too.
Yeah. Were you still reading the books at this point?
No, the books I fell off with in high school. Once homework started picking up and reading became less for fun.
More mature.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, any pleasurable reading that I was doing, you know, for myself was more modern, like young adult, not like sci-fi novels, but just like, I was reading a lot of like, Stephen King or something then. If like, I wanted to read what I thought was like more important at the time. Because Star Wars was done for me, you know, it wasn't like I had met people that were Star Wars fanatics that were really brushed up on the expanded universe. And I knew that like I didn't want to rival them. I didn't want to even try to understand.
Well, that's a lot of catch up.
Yeah, I didn't want to understand. Like I didn't, like someone was like, oh yeah, well like who did Luke Skywalker have a kid with or like or fall in love with? And I was like, I don't know. And this is where I'm deciding that I don't care because it's just too many different stories, too much to take in.
Yeah. What eventually kind of pulled you back in? Did you were you watching TV shows, or was it about the time that Disney took over and decided that they were going to reinvigorate the series?
It must have been just the trailer. I think a lot of people listening to this, if anybody ends up listening to this, is going to remember when they saw the episode 7 trailer and remember, like, I just hearing that theme, you know, the slow theme. I believe it's
the Force theme.
That's the Force theme?
Binary Suns, I think.
Yeah, Binary Suns, and watching the X-wing. So, like we've mentioned over and over, is like my biggest thing is the Starfighters and seeing Poe Dameron, who we didn't know for the first time, and just flying in the X-wings. That was where I think I got sucked back in, and because I remembered the feeling of watching Jedi in theaters as a kid and watching the dogfight at the end. You know, when they turn around and they find out it's a trap, and I remember that feeling of them flying through Death Star and really anything, and playing any video game and just being like, wow, I'm going to get to have that feeling again, even if it's just for this trailer. You know, like I get to rewatch this over and over again. I must have watched the teaser over and over again.
How could you not? You know, it's the first thing Star Wars in years, and not only is it something new, it's something that looks right. You know, it looks used, it looks dirty, it looks like the Star Wars that you and I came up with, and not the shiny new cheesy politic laden prequel sort of junk that ruined it for a lot of people.
Like I was very, very much against the idea of another trilogy. And when rumors happened that Disney acquired it and that someone was like, oh, Star Wars is, did you hear that they're confirming Star Wars? And I'm like, bullshit. That's not going to happen. I was like, that no one would touch that story with a 10-foot pole at this point, you know, like Lucas drove that into the ground. And then they announced it, and I was like, oh, okay, great. You know, I'm just going to whatever. And then a year goes by, and that trailer comes out, and everything changed, I think.
I have it. My sister has it. You have that power, too.
Would you say that you felt an awakening?
Oh, shut up. No, I mean, honestly, yeah. Like, the stupid joke aside, yeah. Like, I was brought, like, my eyes teared up. If you go on the iTunes trailer app or anything like that, or just on your phone and go through any trailer, I don't think you'll find anything as moving as that. Maybe because we have a history in it, I think.
Yeah.
You know, like, and maybe because it is reawakening that nostalgia that kind of lives within us all for Star Wars. But I don't think there's any trailer that has been that moving And I don't think it's a bad thing that it's based on nostalgia and that it's, it's referencing something. But I think it was really important. And I guess the reawakening thing it goes a lot further than like a silly joke. That's a very good point.
All right, to lead out, I'm gonna kind of harken it back to that My Star Wars Story podcast that I mentioned before, and I'm gonna ask this question: where is your Star Wars story today?
I guess the new direction, or maybe I wouldn't even say, I wouldn't go as far to say it's like harkening back to it's like the old direction. I wouldn't say that. My Star Wars story right now is skeptical. Like, and we just saw a great display of what Star Wars should be in The Force Awakens, unless we're wrong 10 years from now, we find out it was actually bad. Which, hey, we've been surprised before. Yeah, I mean, but I'm skeptical because I know what big budget movies are, and I know what happens when the reins get passed to different directors, and good things can happen, but also things can get, look at Avengers and Avengers 2. Avengers 1 was a really great thing, I thought. And Avengers 2 was just, it didn't feel as good to me. It was grand, but I didn't feel as moved by what was going on in that movie.
Are you worried that the Star Wars universe is going to get oversaturated now that there's so much going on? With so many books that are officially canon, and the new episodic movies, as well as the Star Wars story, like anthology movies that are coming out. Do you feel like it's going to be too much, or do you think that's a good thing?
It definitely is going to be like we're going to be having a Marvel syndrome thing going, where we get over inundated with superhero movies, and I think having a Star Wars movie every year is going to be a very odd feeling, because we've been having 0 Star Wars movies a year since Episode 3 came out.
I think it's both good and bad. For me, I love the idea that Star Wars is back and that there's a group handling the way that the story is going to go. It's not in the hands of one person anymore. George Lucas relinquished his control over the Star Wars series, and it's been given to Disney and Kathleen Kennedy and the directors and the story group, who now get to create the story that we're going to be watching for possibly the rest of our lives. And the fact that we get a movie every year is strange. I mean, it's definitely a lot more than we're used to, and I think overall it's good because it expands the Star Wars universe, maybe past the Skywalker lineage, which has dominated what we've seen so far. And I think it's going to be executed in a way where, unlike the Marvel universe, where everything is sort of tightly bound to the comics, like the stories that have already been written and the characters that are already there, it's kind of hard to introduce characters into that universe that haven't already existed somewhere in that world. And that's why we keep getting remakes of things and crossovers and stuff like that. Whereas in Star Wars, you can, the writers kind of have liberty to sort of explore and to create new things and to tie things in where they need to, but not do it because they have to. I think Star Wars has a really bright future ahead of it. And I think there are going to be bad ones. There are going to be bad Star Wars movies that people don't really like. And there are going to be really great ones.
Yeah.
I think The Force Awakens is a really good example of that. And I think the next two are hopefully going to be just as great, expanding the story that we already know, while in the meantime they pepper in little bits from things that we hadn't expected to hear about, like especially with Rogue One coming up next year. We're getting a story about the team that stole the original Death Star plans, and I never expected to hear that story. I never expected that story would really exist. It was just sort of a passing mention in the first movie. And there are bits in the story that don't need an entire movie, and that's where the books and the comics and all that sort of stuff comes in. So I think it's all really exciting, and obviously it creates this giant pool of stuff to talk about on podcasts like this. So if this keeps going, we could go on forever and forever and ever until we're dead, and then it's still going to go on. Somebody else is going to talk about it. So
that's I think one of the trepidatious aspects of thinking about Star Wars. And to answer kind of your question where I'm at with it is what you mentioned in your very well written review of The Force Awakens, which should be linked in the notes to this. I think it's an article that made the rounds right before Force Awakens came out, is that none of us, I mean, presumably, will be seeing the end of Star Wars and knowing how Star Wars truly ends. You know, even with
Isn't that terrifying?
It is. It's really scary, because we all have a beginning and our end will be not unified. You know, I mean, look at the young man who died before the film was actually released. He got to
Daniel,
see
right? That was his name.
Yeah, he got to see The Force Awakens, but you know, from there, that's where his Star Wars story kind of closes, which is, you know, I mean, nothing you can do about it, but it's just weird to think about, you know, like Episode 9 presumably won't be the end. There'll be another trilogy a few years later, you know, maybe
Probably.
yeah, or maybe, I mean, it's weird because, you know, we think of it in terms of trilogies, but what if this is just a continuing story? What if this is just Transformers, you know, the Star Wars edition?
The thing that really makes these trilogies is the amount of time between them. You know, the amount of time between each trilogy has really kind of set it apart. So I think that's an interesting point and something we'll definitely discuss later as they announce more future movies. I mean, so far I think we're set to get a movie every year until 2020. But after that, you know, are they going to do Episode 10 right away, or is there going to be a delay? Like, what's going to happen in the meantime there? It's going to be really interesting to see how Disney and Lucasfilm kind of handle these things. So far, they've been doing really good, but they also have people that are really, really invested in the nostalgia of Star Wars and have the fans' best interests in heart. So it'll be interesting to see as companies change, how plans change and how the story kind of changes as those influence kind of take part in that. So we'll see. Yeah, I think this has been a great kind of start. I can feel like we're already trying to get into more and more, but that'll come as time goes on. And I think as far as this show goes, if this gets out in the world and anybody enjoys it, we'd appreciate any feedback. In the future, I highly doubt we'll go this long. I think we're really trying to aim for something where we, pick a topic for the evening and keep it sort of concise. But as a general sort of primer for who we are and what we enjoy about the Star Wars universe, I think this was pretty good. How do you feel, Mike?
Please, the feedback is much appreciated, but if just, if you want to correct anything that we got wrong in terms of like facts, please don't be mean about it.
I'm sure we'll be wrong many, many times.
Yeah,
and that's sort of the thing that we're gonna have to get into, because I mean, Star Wars fans are vicious and they're very dedicated to their thing. And I know I've been on the flip side of that coin where I've heard something wrong and I'm just screaming at that podcaster who will never hear me and just like, no, that's the wrong name of the planet, you idiot. But
you're talking about two different movies.
But that's,
so just be nice. Just be nice is all we ask.
Be gentle, and we'll figure this out as we go. But I guess that's good.
Yeah, I'm happy about it. I'm ready to sign out. I'm ready.
Well, I have no idea how to do that. How do you sign off for a show?
You say, well, my name's Mike Kamate, then you say your name, and then you say thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
That sounds good.
So ready? Let's try it.
I'm Jake Tender.
My name's Mike Kamate.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Cool. That's a podcast.